So we're on to the next section of our basket. We've completed our 3-rod wale and our upset at the bottom. We're now looking at the next band, the main band of weaving. And the choice of weave for this is a French rand. There's a very good reason that I'm choosing a French rand. There are 2 main types of weave that you would learn as a beginner, the French rand and the English rand. Here you can see the French rand happening. And every row you could decide to finish that, you could stop that, no problems whatsoever. So I could be deciding that this is the height I want it to. I would trim these off and carry on up the basket. If you have a look at this basket down here, I've got 2 lots of French rands. So this is the wale we started off with. French rand, a bit more wale, French rand, a bit more wale. And I can dictate the height of these. If we do an English rand, we have to be dictated by the spiral that works as we work up the weave, and we can only stop at certain places. So this is why I'm choosing to use a French rand today for our next weave. So I've finished my 3-rod wale down the bottom end. I'm being very mindful of the distances between these gaps here. I'm also being very mindful that none of these rods are sticking out or pushing in. And I'm having a look and I'm looking up my basket and I'm quite pleased with the shape that this is working at. And I'm thinking that as I look up, my border is going to come about here. So if I work further and look further up the basket, then these ties that I've got in here are doing a great job. I don't need to take them out. I don't need to adjust them. I'm happy as they are. It's holding everything good and true for me. If I wasn't happy with the shape down the bottom end, then I could just adjust and I could drop these down or up according to the shape. So if it's pulling out too much, I might adjust it and I might squeeze these in a little bit more. If it's going in too much, I might let it out a little bit more. But I just want to show you another way of holding your basket up at this top end, which is to work off a hoop. So next I want to just show you how to make a hoop, which you may use in preference to using elastic bands. This is a long piece of willow. It's just a jobbing piece of willow that I found kicking around. It could be one of your 5-foots that you've discarded from earlier. It could be something from another project. It needs to be wet, so it needs to be flexible or fresh. And all I'm doing is accentuating that smile on my willow by giving it much more of a stroke. I'm then going to use my belly as my support, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a very big hoop, and the top is just going to tuck underneath here. I'm holding this and I'm gently pulling through. What I'm not doing is pulling through so this one comes out. I'm pulling through that so this one stays where it is. So I'm getting my hoop and I'm offering my hoop up. I want it the same size as my base. So I think I want to be a little bit tighter. And I can just measure that with my base. When I'm happy that that's the right size, then I'm going to weave the rest of this in. And this is just there as an extra pair of hands and to hold. It's not there as anything pretty, but you can use this same method to make Christmas wreaths as well. I don't need to tuck in. I can just sit the willow there and I've got a hoop. Not a very stable hoop though, so I might want to put a second rod in. So just in the same way, I've just curved that rod and I'm just going to put it in the opposite side. So I've got a butt end here and a butt end at the bottom. It just makes it equal. What I don't want to be doing is to have a really strong side and a really weak side. And I can just hold that one in and a nice big sewing in gesture. And if you can, make it nice and tight, just twist it into the previous weave. So we're just going to go round. Don't worry that it's slightly kinky. As I say, it's a rough piece of willow. It's there as a rough guide. That kink won't matter to me whatsoever. And you'll probably find that it will disappear. You're not even seeing it. My left hand is just holding the weave in place. My right hand is guiding it round. And as you put the second one in, what you might feel you want to do is to just finish it off by separating the weave and pushing that up into there. Steer it a little bit to get it into shape. And in the old adage of measure twice, cut once, we're just going to check that that is roughly the same size as our base. And that's how you would make a hoop. If you make a hoop the same size as your basket, we're going to be upright on the sides. If you make the hoop slightly smaller, it will compress this in and obviously make the basket come in. If you make the hoop bigger, then that will flare out. So the next thing is for me to show you how to put that onto your basket. So now I've got my hoop, I can go about inserting my hoop onto my basket. So I'm just going to gather the top together and I'm just going to drop it on. Okay. I've done that before I've released these so that there's some control on the basket. So I'm going to come back to my toggles and they're nice and easy to release and I'm not going to damage the willow underneath them. And I can come back to this toggle and I can release this one as well. She says. It's much easier than I'm making it look. And then what I can do is to lift this hoop up to the appropriate place on my basket. What I don't want to be is too low because I'll be in the way of my weaving. I don't want to be too high because it might be out of control. And to secure this hoop into my weave, some people like to separate this weave and thread one of these through, maybe at one point here and at the opposite side of the basket. It's a little bit more stable with 3 points of contact. But I find for me that it still may potentially damage this rod. So what I do is come back to still using my toggles and to use this system. This time I'm just going to wrap it round, maybe a couple of times, maybe once. I'll try it once and see what it looks like and what it feels like. But that's nice and gripped. And I've got ultimate control on the fact I can lift that or drop that. So I would put 3 points of contact in, and that's how I could potentially use a hoop within my basket. But as I say, I'm quite happy with the control that I'd got on, and I would like to leave my elastic bands on for my particular way of working on my basket. It's up to you, whatever works for you, whatever method of attaching the top, controlling this basket, go for it. So we're now starting to look to begin the French round weave. So this is this band of green that we're going to work across here. Now I'm going to slightly mix it up a little bit. I'm going to stop working on the demonstration model that I've been working on so far. And I'm going to swap into using one on a wooden base. The reason behind that is there's going to be a very high contrast for you to be able to see where I'm putting these new rods in, which you wouldn't see on that one. So we're going to be working on this one from now on. But it would be equally applicable to do it onto there. Everything is exactly the same. It's just there as an aid for you to see the contrast in the weave. So we've chosen our 4-foot rods again. It's really, really key for us this time that they are all of a similar length because we want them all to run out at a similar time. And again, we're looking for uniformity in the thickness of these willows. And we're also looking for really good, strong willow. We don't want to be joining in. If we do have a snap or we do go wrong, I will show you how we can join in, but if we can avoid it, great stuff. So we're going to change camera angle so you can see me inserting the first rods into the French round. So we're inserting the first rods. I purely and simply have my table here as a guide for me just to prop this up. You could work this on the table, you could work this upright, but I like to see where I'm going with things. So here I can clearly see the levels I'm working at. I can clearly see which rods are working under which other ones, and I'm equally balanced between my thighs and my table. You might want to stand up and have a normal size table and this be resting on. As with everything that we're doing, Find your comfortable position. See what works best for you. So, we have our rods, we have our upset, we have these near enough equally spaced out. We're going to keep an eye on the spacings. We're going to keep an eye on the fact that these rods want to be in line with each other and we don't want any wobbling about. And because we're using the fat end of these rods, we can actually dictate where everything is going. So, we have 2 starts to a French round, and again you can choose which one you want to do. Traditionally, it would be behind one, in front of one, behind one. And that would be the start. If this rod is slightly thicker, or you want the idea of a false wale on here for it to look slightly different, then the other alternative start is behind one, in front of 2, behind one. I think it's working quite nicely. The length and thickness of this willow wants really to put that in front of 2, so that's what I'm going for. Behind one, in front of 2, behind one, and back out the front again. We move to the left with this weave to insert the next rod. So the next rod moves and is inserted behind here. We don't want to stick it too far in because it might interfere with the next bit of weave. So just slightly behind, we're going to trim this ugly end up a little bit later on. Behind, in front of 2, behind. And then our third rod, again, remember to push that down. Behind one, in front of 2, behind one. And I'm taking a lot of time and care when I pull these down to maintain these distances. And just like the 3-rod wale, we have one of these coming out of this space, one coming out of the next space, one coming out of the consecutive space. So what we're aiming to do is to keep working to the left, and we're aiming to insert all of these rods in until we get round to the beginning again, and we can't quite work out where we should be shoving the next one in. So I'm just going to carry on and whiz those round and catch back up with you when I'm at the end. So I've inserted my rods into almost all of my positions that I need to. I have 3 rods left. I carefully counted my rods out beforehand. And if you can see here, I've got something occupying the space in between most of the rods, but here I've got nothing, here I've got nothing, and here I haven't. So I've got 3 gaps I need to fill. So I know that those 3 gaps are going to get taken up by these 3 rods here. You can do a quick visual check-in that there's something in every space. Just check all the way around, but now we're going to change the angle so that you can actually see how I insert these last 3 rods. What doesn't happen is they don't lay on top of the previous rods. We've got to thread them in underneath. So we've changed the angle so that you can see these last 3 rods going in. This was my first rod. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just push those first rods gently out the way. I'm going to lift them out the way and pretend that they're not there. These were my last rods to go in, so I've worked behind this one, and I now know that I need to work behind that one, and that one. So my first rod goes in, behind, in front of 2, behind. Exactly the same weave. We're just being mindful that we're not going to run over these. Behind, in front of 2, behind. And then the last one tucks in here, behind, in front of 2. Little bit of a wiggle to get that in, but you can see when that gets compressed down, that's in that space, that's in the next one, that is in the next one, and I've done my full join in, and that's a complete row of French rand. So I've completed my first row of French rand, and ideally your eye level wants to be about here, so you're seeing as you're weaving. But I also want you to see the view from the top, so that you can see how this weave's working and where they're moving into different spaces. We've gone all the way around so that each of these rods is occupying the gap in between two uprights. As you start the new row, you sort of mess that rhythm up. That's fine, because when you come back round, you will sort that out. So we went in front of 2 to begin with, but we're now going to go back to the classic French round of in front of 1, behind 1. And I've got a peg here because I just find it a little bit handy to mark out where I've been. Because we've also got these as quite dominant thick rods, now's a good opportunity to push down or to wrap down onto these. Don't get too carried away with doing all of your French round and not wrapping down. There's at least 2 or 3 opportunities to wrap down as it progresses. There's also still the opportunities to ensure that these gaps in between are nice and even and level. So we'll start the weave off. So I'm going to put a peg in where I do the first bit. So I'm going to start here, in front of 1, behind 1, and back out the front again. This is where I've created my double. So I'm just going to put a peg in there, just as a visual. It's very easy to get carried away and not sort things out, and then your weave will be out of step. We move to the left, in front of 1, behind 1. And again, take it steady as it's coming down and compress. Move to the left, in front of 1, behind 1, compress down, move to the left. We're going to carry on that same movement all the way around the basket. Now, if you forget where you are, you're in the gap. So you're always working the left one of the gap. Ignore these doubles that have occurred here. What we should now be seeing from now on are singles until we get back to the peg. So I'm going to continue weaving, and I'll see you again when I've got back round to the peg. So I'm now almost back round to my peg. I've just got this last one to put in, and then I've got these doubles here, and I'm not sure which one of these to take. You can't see the view from above, and you can't work out which one from above. This is where you really need to be looking on the side of your basket. And if we lift all of these 4 up, these doubles, the one you need to be taking is the lowest. So if I look here, it's this one here that is the lowest. So this is occupying the top level, the next level down, the next level, and the bottom level. So we take the bottom one, and we do the in front of 1, behind 1. We then look for the next lowest again. So top level, middle level, lowest level. And I'm just going to move the peg out because I don't want it to be in the way of my weaving. And then we shouldn't have to do anything with the last 2 because we should be back in order now. And if you look from the side, that weave is growing and it's going into a diagonal. And if I flip it back to look at the top view, then I can check back in that we've got 1 in every single space. So that is me completing a row. And every row happens in that same pattern. So we take our peg, we start wherever we want to. It doesn't have to be the same place we left off. It could be somewhere new. We go in front of 1, behind 1. We've created a double, and we just put that peg in as our visual aid. We move to the left, in front of 1, behind 1. There are our 2 doubles that we're going to have to sort out at the end of the row, and we're back on again. And every single row that we do now follows that same pattern of weave, same pattern of uplift as you come to the end. So in effect, you're making a bit of a mess. You're running around your basket and you're sorting that mess out. And I'm just going to carry on weaving now. And every single row, I will peg, I will sort the pairs out in their levels, and then I will move on to the next row. And at any point, once I'm back to all being sorted, I could finish that weave and I could trim off. So I'll catch back in with you when I've got a little bit more height on my basket. And remember to keep wrapping down, and remember to keep an eye on these spacings. And also remember that if we need to alter what's up here or the hoop, then alter it. This basket is coming in a nice inward sort of a shape. If you want it out, then adjust accordingly. I just thought it'd be worth showing you how to get out of a broken rod. So what I want you to imagine is for some reason that this particular rod had broken here. So I cut where the break is so I can assess what damage it is, and I can assess how to put a new one in. I don't want the finish on the exterior of the basket. So really I want this to be tucked inside of the basket. And it's a little bit long, so I'm going to cut it so it's sitting behind this upright. To put a new rod in, it might be that it's just a little bit of a blemish and that this rod is still perfect and is still okay to work, so we could insert this one. It may be that we want a complete new rod, in which case you'd just be sizing it up based on this rod. So you wouldn't start off with a 4 foot right from the very butt. You might cut that 4 foot down to the same 2 foot length as this. And to insert a rod, literally all it is this one is sitting at the back, so you would have this one sitting at the back as well. If you actually work back a little bit, then you can actually get this one to trap it in over the top of it. So if I look here, this one would work and wouldn't be holding this one in, it would still be in fresh air. Whereas if I actually actively cut this back to another stake, so if I cut it back there, lay the new one in, do the weave, then the weave is holding this in, and the next rod is also holding this in. So don't panic, and it doesn't have to be fitted in exactly where you broke the other one. Think back a little bit and get to a point where it's going to capture it. But the key for me is to match the rod so that it doesn't look from the side like we've inserted a new rod at all. Now, unfortunately, these rods can't sit side by side, they sit over the top of each other. So there is a bit of a tendency for this to spring up. So just be mindful of that when you're compressing or when you're wrapping down. It shouldn't alter your weave too much. And then we can just carry on as normal. So here you can see that I've put quite a bit of French round on now. What I'm wanting to do is to use the graduated tone of this particular willow. So I've gone from the beautiful bright green working into the lovely bright yellow. What I don't want to do is to work till these tips are too thin. So I'm going to stop this out now. I've gone all the way round, I've got rid of my pairs, so I'm in a position now where I can trim. I've wrapped down. Everything is good. There's been the quick visual that every one of these has got one behind each space. I'm also going to turn the basket round a number of times just to check that the weave's all in order. The nice thing with this weave is if you have gone wrong, you can sort of lift and unpick a bit and then just thread it back in. It really, really is easy to go back a few rows if you've done something wrong and just do a localised unpick. So we're going to have a look from the top at exactly where we're going to trim. So if I look here now, what I'm wanting to do is to trim so that that rod is sat behind this upright. If I trim downwards, there's a chance that I'm going to catch the weave. So what I want to do is to just very carefully go in sideways with my secateurs, and I'm cutting so there's still a little bit sticking over, so I've still got a little bit of play, a little bit of flexibility in those rods. I'm going to go round and cut every one of these sticking out rods out in order to be ready to put my next round of weaving on. So we're now at a stage where we've completed our French round section. What we're going to do is to replicate what we did to start off with, the 3-rod wale, up here. And you can refresh yourself and look back at the earlier section of the basket to see how this was done. What we're not going to do is the pull down bit that we did at the start. So I'm just going to show you the beginning of this just to refresh you, but then you can go back and have a look and carry on with the rest of the wale on your own. So we're working again with the lovely 4-foot rods. We're again checking these in terms of the thickness of the rod down at the bottom end and also in terms of the length. I've counted 12 of these out. That will do me for both sides of the basket and will take me from tips to butts and back to tips again. So remember that we want to start on tips and finish on tips to give us that nice blend in the weave. So we put one tip in this space, one tip in the consecutive space, and one tip in the consecutive space after. Make sure that you push them in a little way. We don't want them too thin and scrawny, and you want to be able to grab hold of them to start weaving. So we take the left one, as we did before, in front of 2, behind 1. And remember, it's got to come out of this space, and you've got that little hidden one there. So it's in front of 2, behind 1. Pick up left, in front of 2, behind 1. Pick up left, in front of 2, behind 1. And so we're going to continue with that weave, making sure we're working over the top of the other ones until we get halfway around the basket, and we're going to join in new tips. Be very mindful that you've got this set up beautifully. You've got the gaps in between working beautifully. You don't want to pull them out by putting the wale down and suddenly pulling this out of alignment or out of distance in between the two. So I've hit the halfway point here, and I will be joining in my new tips in exactly the same way. These will work round to butts, never overtaking the previous row, and all the joins are exactly the same as they were on the bottom section. Tips to butts, join in butts, or run back to tips. You should use all of your 12 rods, and then we'll have the top wale completed. So we're all wrapped down. Everything's nice and neat and tidy. We just need to do the final finessing before we're going to drop this border. So at the moment we've got these bits sticking out. We want to cut these off. And again, we want to cut them as short as we can, but what we don't want is for those to disappear into the gap. So we're looking at this rod coming down here, and this sticking out rod needs to be cut on a sloping cut so that it sits against there. So again, just a little bit of a lift and a sideways cut, and we can go around and we can do that, and we should have 3 in a row from where we started off our 3-rod wale. Not worried about these little tiny ones, but I can turn around my basket and I can do these 3 as well. 1, 2, 3. They're all trimmed off, nice and neat and tidily. And our next job is to start measuring to check that we've got an even height of basket all the way round. So we're going to use a very technical tool to do that, a scrap piece of stick. You will want to do yours onto the table so you can measure from the table. But I've got the advantage of being able to measure off the bottom of this wooden base. So I can show you clearly what's going off, but obviously you'll be measuring from the bottom of the table upwards. So I'm going to cut that nice and neat and tidily. I can either measure from there on this basket or measure from here. Either is just equally as acceptable. I tend to like working from here. So I'm going to offer this up, and I'm going to cut this to exactly the same height as the top of my wale. What I'm going to do is I'm going to work round, and I'm going to check in all the way around my basket that it's a nice even height. And if it's not an even height, then I need to do something about it. So here it's slightly higher, so I might need to compress this a little bit with a little bit more wrapping down. But generally this looks a good even basket all the way around, but take the time, the care and the effort to make sure that that's level before we do anything with the bordering.